GDP growth, and if we look at per capita GDP growth, it is rising at a much faster pace as compared to nominal GDP growth. There's a broad-based increase in bank credit. Loans against gold is increasing.
Why do you think credit is becoming so easily available nowadays?
So there's
Radhika Pandey is an associate professor at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy and an expert in financial regulation and economic policy. Today, she joins us to discuss India's credit growth and its impact on financial stability.
credit card receivable. This is something could become a cause of concern. The bank's exposure to credit card has increased a lot. When the RBI started seeing that there are some signs of stress in the credit market, then the RBI tried to
Many borrowers have multiple loans running
Absolutely.
at the same time. What are the implications on the credit ecosystem of India then? Welcome to the show, Radhika. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Ashish.
I'll straight away dive into the questions that I have for you, Radhika. So, RBI has slashed the repo rate by 25 basis point. The first question really is, what are the implications according to you?
So let's look at the background. RBI has cut the repo rate after last week budget has cut the income tax. So there was this lot of concern about growth slowing down and inflation also coming down. So there was this expectation from the RBI that it will start cutting rates. So it has done on that, delivered on that, and RBI has cut rates. The most important reason is to give some lift to growth rate, which is for this year is expected at somewhere around 6.4%. And consumption demand, particularly urban demand, was also dwindling. So to address that, interest rates have been cut. The hope or the expectation is that with the cut in interest rate, the demand for credit will get a boost. But there are different, transmission challenges in between, because when RBI cuts rate, then banks have to cut their lending rates, and at the same time, to protect their interest margins, they would have to cut their deposit rates also. Now, how far banks will cut lending rates and how far and how quickly banks will reprice their deposits, all that needs to be seen. But to the extent that some part of the bank's lending is already linked to the repo rate, which is it's called the external benchmark lending rate. So towards that, the EMIs will get cheaper, loans will get cheaper. So for example, for State Bank of India, 28% of the loan book is linked to the repo rate. So to that extent, there will be slowing down. But overall, the impact will take at least 2 to 3 quarters to show its impact.
The government claims that this is going to boost the slowing economy. What do you think about this?
So to some extent, yes, because what can monetary policy do? What can fiscal policy do? It can cut taxes and it can boost expenditure. What can monetary policy do? It has only one tool at its disposal, which is the policy repo rate. So it has tried to cut the repo rate, and it's coming after almost 5 years that the policy repo rate is now cut by 25 basis points. We have seen a period after 2022, after the Russia-Ukraine war, that interest rates started to rise. And then there was a prolonged period when the rates were left unchanged. And now, because the growth is, there are concerns on the growth front, not only for this year, but also for the next year. The economic survey is projecting somewhere between 6.3 to 6.8% growth for the next financial year. So it was expected that the RBI's growth boost will be in the form of interest rate cuts. So how it will lead to lifting of growth or boosting of growth will depend on the cut in the lending rates. And partially, yes, lending rates, the loan rates, the cost of borrowing will come down, and that will have a ripple effect in boosting consumer demand and in general growth rate.
Yeah. So let's shift our focus maybe from the macros to the actual users. So every digital payment platform is offering information about pre-approved loan. Why do you think credit is becoming so easily available nowadays?
There are a lot of factors at play. One is that there is a lot of emphasis on financial inclusion. So that is leading to easy availability of credit, and a lot of innovative financial instruments are being developed to further the goal of financial inclusion. Because with banks, there is this problem of last mile connectivity. Therefore, we saw non-bank financial companies coming up to bridge the gap between customers and banks. And then we have these new platforms coming up, digital platform, the the prepaid instruments. A lot of these instruments are coming up, digital platforms are coming up to bridge the gap and to accelerate the process of financial inclusion. And that is why, and and of course, there is also an increase in the demand for credit. Towards that, there is need for more instruments.
What are the key trends that you're observing in India's credit growth across consumer and business lending?
So we are seeing, there's a broad-based increase in, particularly if we look at the bank credit, we are seeing increase in consumer loans particularly. Within consumer loans also, there is a broad-based increase in consumer loans, particularly housing loans are increasing, consumer durable increasing, loans against gold is increasing, education loans are increasing. So as I said, because the per capita GDP growth is rising at a faster pace as compared to the GDP growth of the country, so it is leading to increase in the demand for credit. There was a period, if we compare and contrast with the 2003 to 2008 period, there the credit demand was largely driven by corporate credit, where banks were lending to large industries, banks were lending to infrastructure, and that was leading to increase in the supply of credit. And there was a time during that period where credit growth had risen to a phenomenal 40%. That's a very high credit growth. And so that time it was driven by industrial credit, infrastructure credit.
Yeah.
Now, what we are seeing over the last, post COVID, when we talk about credit growth, it's mainly led by loans to personal, loans to households, and also services loans, where banks are lending to non-bank financial companies, and then they again are lending to households. So this time around, the increase in credit growth that we are seeing is primarily led by households, and that is driven by, as I said, increase in income. That's also driven by, post COVID there was an increase in pent up demand, so that led to increase in household credit. Plus there are various other reasons, but the nature of increase in credit is different before the global financial crisis and now. Earlier, as I said, driven by industrial credit, and now household credit.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And let me give you some numbers. In fact, there was a recent survey that was done by Saral Credit. It's a fintech platform. There are around 67% of Indian families who have availed a personal loan. And around 53% of Indian youth have taken personal loan prior the age of 30.
Correct.
And if you see, from 2014 to 2024, the personal loan share in the gross banking credit has increased, almost doubled from 16% to 32%.
Yeah.
So why is this happening? What are the trends? What are the implications of all this?
Yeah. So personal loan, as I said, is rising. Household loans is rising. And as I said, there's a broad-based increase. If we look within personal loan, there are various categories. Within personal loan, in terms of the value, the most important is housing loans, because housing loan accounts for 50% of the personal loan. And there, very interesting trend that is happening in India is the proliferation of global capability centers. Where trade is happening, trade in services in India. What we see now is not the trade in goods is not rising; it's the trade in services which is rising. Many of the companies abroad have set up their global capability centers, their offshore centers here, back-end centers here in India, and there they have hired a lot of young people, and because they have good income, so their demand for housing has increased. So that explains the increase in the demand for housing loans, that because they have good jobs, and because there is such a widespread proliferation of global capability centers, and they need skilled personnel to man those GCCs, global capability centers. So they are hiring people, and these are the very people, small group of people, but they are taking big ticket loans so that they are able to, so that they can finance their housing purchases.
Yeah.
So that explains housing loans. The other loan, as I said, is credit card receivables. This is something, so that is housing loan is maybe we can say secured loan. At the same time, what is could become a cause of concern is the unsecured personal loan, which mainly includes credit card receivables, where banks' exposure to credit card has increased a lot. To some extent, it is driven by banks themselves promoting purchases through credit cards. It becomes cheaper if you buy through credit card. So that is increasing at a very widespread pace. And when the RBI started seeing that there are some incipient signs of stress in the unsecured credit market, particularly unsecured personal loan, then the RBI tried to put brakes on that, and RBI increased the risk weights of banks' exposure to unsecured personal loans and banks' exposure to NBFCs. So since then, we are seeing a notable moderation in the unsecured personal loan. So there was a broad-based surge because of increase in income, because of increase in trade in services, which led to increase in the demand for housing, which led to increase in credit for housing. So that is one part. But the other part is also pent-up demand and increasing credit availability through credit card purchases that resulted in increase. And also the other thing is that there is an increase in, which is showing up in fact in increase in household leverage, because now household indebtedness has, as a percentage of GDP, has risen at a very fast pace.
Yeah.
So while we are still lower as compared to our comparable peer economies, but over the last 2-3 years post COVID, we have seen that household debt has risen at a very fast pace. So some part of it is okay. It shows the growing dependence on credit, which is also a manifestation of increase in income. But the other part is something which could manifest into higher stressed assets for banks. That is something that needs to be monitored.
What I get a sense of is that you're saying that it's mainly because of financial empowerment
Right.
that the personal loan space is increased.
Yeah,
But is it just because of that, or is it also that there is a growing dependence on debt as well?
Correct. Because we don't get to see what kind of customers are borrowing, who are these households that are, borrowing from banks. And in that context, the last financial stability report that was released by the Reserve Bank of India, it has some very interesting findings. So what it says is that the average credit is rising for prime borrowers. Okay, super prime borrowers, not subprime borrowers. So these are those borrowers who have ample credit worthiness. So
Right.
the average credit is rising for that set of borrowers. So they tried to quell this fear that it's leading to growing reliance on credit and growing household indebtedness. So what is happening is that the average credit, the size of loan is more for those customers or those borrowers who are prime or super prime. That is, those who have the ability to repay back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there is increase in the number of loans by subprime borrowers. That is, those who may have some troubles in repaying loan. So it is actually a combination of both, because right now we don't see much of a trouble. There are only very small pockets of stress. Which is a cause of concern. But going forward, if it is this bunch of subprime borrowers who then borrow more, or whose size of borrowings increase, that could lead to systemic risk concern. So as of now, if one borrower defaults, there's no problem. But if there's a wide swathe of borrowers who start defaulting, and that starts showing up on banking sector's balance sheet, that is a cause of concern.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, currently it is not so much of a concern, because the credit boom is primarily being driven by good quality borrowers, not the subprime borrowers. But this is something to be monitored, because there is increase in the number of small ticket loans by subprime borrowers, and that needs to be monitored.
Yeah, I think that definitely needs to be monitored. And what I also understand is that many borrowers have multiple loans running
Absolutely.
at the same time.
Absolutely.
What are the implications on the credit ecosystem of India then onwards.
Yeah, that is again something to be watchful of, because as you rightly said, there are number of loans. They take secured loans also, they take unsecured loans also, and if there are any signs of delinquency in unsecured loan, that would make their secured loans also troublesome. That would have implications for secured loans as well. So overall, this is something to be monitored, and in fact, RBI has already started monitoring it. It took that time in November 2023 when they increased the risk weight. There was a lot of criticism that RBI is preempting, RBI is doing something which wasn't required. But when we now look back, we see that it was needed at that time, and it helped in checking the growth in unsecured personal loan, and therefore having a positive impact on banks' balance sheet, because we've seen a period after the global financial crisis when banks' NPAs skyrocketed, particularly of public sector banks. The NPAs had risen to more than 10%. And now we are in a situation where banks' NPAs are just 2.6%. So there has been a steady improvement in the bank's asset quality, and we need to be aware of the constant emergence of incipient signs of stress, and they need to be checked.
You look mainly hopeful, as far as the Indian economy is concerned.
Right now it's hopeful, as I said, and RBI is doing what it takes. And, the problem is that we don't get the micro level data on what are these households that are borrowing. And once we get this picture from the RBI, we do see that, yes, it's mostly the good quality borrowers that are borrowing. But there are these subprime borrowers whose credit profile needs to be watched going forward. So there is a need for, we can't stop the growth of credit, but it needs to be monitored in a timely fashion.
Let me ask the famous question, the bubble question,
Correct.
When does a credit bubble occur?
Yeah.
And given India's current growth in credit, are we actually moving towards that at all?
So credit bubble occurs when, all sources of credit show a very strong abnormal growth. There's an increase in bank credit, there is an increase in bond issuances by companies, by all borrowers. And ultimately, if there are because when there's so much of supply of bonds and so much of supply of credit, it leads to increase in asset prices. It leads to what is called overheating in the economy. And ultimately, if there is only very small crisis, ultimately everything falls apart, and there is increase in the widespread surge of NPAs, non-performing assets for banks. We did face this situation during 2008. We had this credit bubble from 2003 to 2007. Our overall bank credit was rising at a very fast pace, and suddenly, due to a combination of factors, global financial crisis, companies not able to repay their loans on time, ultimately it resulted in a sharp surge in NPAs. And then it led to another phase where, what we were seeing is what evergreening of loans. To hide one loan, bank was giving another loan. And that was mainly driven by corporates. As I said, that time, the surge in bank loan was not driven by households or by services or by agriculture. It was driven by big companies and infrastructure firms borrowing a lot. And when there was this, at the same time, a lot of unfavorable events happened at the same time that resulted in a credit bubble. Right now, we are not facing that kind of a situation because our overall credit growth is not very high. Because if we look at overall credit, it is composed of credit to agriculture, credit to industry, services, and households. There we see agriculture is fine, credit to industry is actually decelerating because industries are not borrowing. Post-COVID, they have deleveraged. They're actually repaying their loans. They're not even investing. That's the other problem of growth that we are facing, that private investments is not picking up. So agri loans are within range. Industrial loans are more or less subdued. So what is driving this is only the household loans and loans to services. So it's only these two segments that are driving this loan growth that we saw till a few months back, till June 2024, we were seeing that credit to a household was rising above 20%. Each month, the year-on-year change in credit to household was above 20%. And that led to these concerns and RBI increasing the risk weight, meaning that, banks have to set aside higher capital if banks want to lend to unsecured creditors. And after that, we are seeing a moderation. So
Right.
before reaching that credit bubble stage, actually RBI tried to curtail that sharp surge in credit, because it did see it rising for 2 years, and then this was curtailed through increase in risk weights and other macroprudential measures.
Right. And with the rising, expansion of credit growth, how are the corporate and government bonds reacting? Are the bonds being issued just to repay the loans? Or, and do you see that, there's a problem that we may face because of the rising defaults that could be a problem as well? That could be a risk
So
as well?
what we are seeing is that because there is an increase in the demand for credit by households, deposits are lagging because deposits are not that high, because individuals are also households are parking their savings in stock market. They are not so much keeping their parking their savings in banks as deposits. So this is the structural change that we are seeing post COVID, that that households are, because of these SIPs, banks, mutual funds, households are more investing their savings in the stock market. They
Yeah.
are not investing in banks. So the share of deposits hasn't increased. So deposits are not rising, but at the same time, the demand for loan by household is at a higher level. So how will banks fund that loan growth? Banks will, have to borrow. So banks are now borrowing through the what is called issue of CDs, which is called certificate of deposit.
Right.
So that is what is happening. So overall implication, what we are seeing is that corporate bond issuances is happening, but again, it is only the AAA rated companies that are issuing and financial institutions that are issuing bonds. But banks, in order to fund their loan growth, because if we talk about credit deposit ratio, CD ratio, it's for some banks it is almost 80%. So that means that credit growth is rising, deposit growth is not rising at that fast pace. And therefore, how will they finance this credit growth? They will have to have some funds. So they are issuing they are borrowing through the certificates of deposit.
Yeah.
So that is what is happening. And that is how banks are trying to finance the demand for loans from households.
Got it. And in the bond market, are you seeing a rise of riskier lending, like the junk bonds or low rate corporate bonds? Are you seeing a rise in that?
Actually, that is not happening because we have very strict regulations in the corporate bond market. What we are seeing actually is that it's mostly, as I said, AAA rated bonds that are being issued, and also mostly by financial firms, by like non-bank financial companies. So these are the type of borrowers that are accessing the bond market through the issuances of corporate bond. In fact, the problem lies otherwise on the other side, that there is a need to encourage companies to issue less than AAA rated bond also. Issue AA rated bond,
Right.
issue less than AA rated bonds to have more liquidity. But that's not happening because those people who can invest their pool of funds are primarily the insurance firms, pension funds, and by regulation, they can only invest in highly rated bonds.
Yeah.
So our regulations are such that we don't have this problem of junk bonds being issued. It's a very narrow, our corporate bond market is very narrow because it's mostly AAA rated bonds that are allowed to be issued mostly, and also by a limited set of investors who can invest in these bonds. Those who have a vast pool of savings, like insurance firms, they can invest in these bonds. So that problem is not there in India's case.
How about we shift our focus to definitely a riskier option, which is the P2P lending?
Correct.
That's rising quite a bit,
Yes.
and lots of individuals are opting for that as an investment option. What do you think would be the implication? Do you think that people actually understand the risk of of lending like this? Because the biggest misconception that people have is that the platform is actually going to hedge the risk. But that's not the case, really.
Yeah, that's not the case. Absolutely. So that is the area where more work is required. In fact, in general, not only P2P, but like NBFCs, fintech firms that are providing credit at easy terms, which is, incentivizing customers to not go to banks, but to borrow through these platforms. That is something that needs to be watched out for. Particularly, there is a need for greater awareness, as you rightly said. There is a greater need for various, understanding the terms and conditions and the risks, and as well as the benefits. That is one. The other is also, customer protection, dispute redressal framework. Where does one go if one is not satisfied with a bank? Then one can go for the RBI's ombudsman mechanism. Where does one go if one feels cheated due to the P2P lending platform? So there is a need for greater awareness. There is a need for especially among some set of customers who do not understand the risks. And now also what is happening is that it is becoming complicated because the lending platforms are providing a lot of products that are bundled with the credit products.
Yeah.
Like they are offering credit enhancement, or they are providing some insurance product that is linked to your credit loan product. That creates problem. P2P lending should remain simple, plain vanilla loan product. When it gets a hybrid product, and when it has some other bundling, that customers are pressured that if you are buying this, please buy this also, please buy this insurance product also. That is where all the problems arise. And but again, the Reserve Bank of India has taken some proactive measures in this regard. They have modified their master directions on NBFC P2P lending to make lending more stringent. The exposure of a particular lender across the platform has been fixed now in terms of numerical targets. And also, this bundling of products is something that is explicitly being discouraged through the lending platform. So, what is important is that there needs to be a balance between financial innovation as well as regulation.
Yeah.
When financial innovation tends to outweigh regulation, that is when all problems arise. And there will always be a time gap, because innovation by these new market participants, it happens at a faster clip, and regulation takes time to catch up that, okay, there could be a problem here also.
Yeah.
So that is where the customers need to be very wary of the terms and conditions, and then only they should participate in these kind of lending platforms. Because RBI is doing a lot of measures to promote awareness of the risks that are embedded in these platforms.
Right. Where do you think the lending economy is moving towards?
So I think going forward, the lending rates are going to remain range bound. They will be in the range overall. The aggregate bank credit growth is likely to remain in the range of 12 to 14%, which is decent for an emerging economy. It should be in double digits. There are various statistics that needs to be watched, and this is something which the economic survey this time that was released one day before the budget. They also have a very nice, pictorial representation of credit to GDP ratio. That in India, over the last 2-3 years, credit to GDP ratio has risen at a very fast pace. So there is an increase in credit growth, and there is something called credit to GDP gap.
Yeah.
Which is, how if are you above the trend line or are you below the trend line? So was happening was that after COVID, credit growth fell sharply, but now after that we are closely closing that gap and we are moving positive. So as I said, as of now, everything seems fine, but because credit growth is rising at a faster pace, particularly the retail loans and personal loan need to be monitored. Within that, also, it is the unsecured personal loan that need to be monitored. At a micro level, it is fine, but when it starts showing its impact on the financial system as a whole, that is where things become problematic, and we should avoid having another round of NPA crisis that we had after the global financial crisis. Because after so many years, now is the time when banks' asset quality is really healthy, and we should try to maintain that health of the banking sector.
Right. 2-3 points on what was strict instructions that if you wanted to give to the banks, what is it that they could do?
They should strengthen their underwriting standards. They should be very clear about the borrower profile, which is actually what is happening, because after the increase in the risk weights in November 2023, we are seeing that there is a move towards shifting to higher quality borrowers. So we saw that there was an incremental increase in the prime borrowers and super prime borrowers. So which mean that the underwriting standards, the inquiry standards have become more stringent. So I think that's the direction to go, because going forward at a macro level, banks' net interest margins are now going to be under pressure. Because interest rate has been cut, so banks will be pressured to cut their lending rates as well as deposit rates.
Yeah.
Now, they cannot cut their deposit rates so much, so they'll not cut their lending rates also. So this is a very, now we are again moving into a tricky situation where banks have to navigate in a way that they don't face problems on their margin, and at the same time they are able to maintain a healthy credit growth, because that is what is needed for the economy to grow. We need credit to have an 8% plus GDP growth.
Yeah.
But that growth, that credit should be broad based. It should be by industry, agriculture, services, and not just driven by a small chunk of unsecured personal loans.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Radhika, for your time. Lovely
Thank you.
chatting with you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ashish.
Well, I had a wonderful discussion with Radhika, and here are my 3 key takeaways. Number 1, we need to watch out for unsecured loans, as that could lead to a rise of NPAs. Number 2, reduction in repo rates can impact the bank's net interest margins, and that could have an impact on the overall economy as well. And number 3, financial innovations in the form of P2P lending platforms need to take care of the interest of borrowers and lenders as well. And hence, financial innovation needs to be matched by the right regulation as well. And don't forget to consult a qualified financial advisor for your investment decisions, as they understand your personal needs and preferences. Let us know what you thought and learned about this discussion in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the Personal Finance TV.